For more on China's Saihanba Forest Park and the ecosystem rebuilding, we are joined by Mr. Chen Liangzhong, who is the CEO and board member of Operation Earth, and also Mr. Zhang Jianyu, China project leader from the U.S. Environment Defense Fund. Welcome to both of you. I want to start by asking both of you, this is quite a thing for China, because it's been quite some time that China has been not awarded with that specific significant achievement award. But what would this mean for environmentalists in China like you, Mr. Zhang?
Well, I think China certainly deserve it, and I think we have made so many achievements through, I would say, the past 5 to 10 years. But I think this award certainly is a huge recognition of one of the achievements that we have been making for the past 5 to 10 years.
This is at a time when China is fighting huge pollution. And also China is at a crossroads as to how to deal with the smog issue, which the world knows these days. I remember going on trips these days and people would ask, how would you survive the smog in wintertime? So, Mr. Chen, how would you look at this award vis-a-vis China's overall efforts trying to go through one of the most difficult times of environmental challenge?
I think it's number one is recognize China's huge effort in past several decades. At the same time, to give China's encouragement to further make further efforts to improve our environment. So this is a very significant achievement and also a kind of challenge for us to working even harder.
Well, working harder, Mr. Chen, what area?
Especially in the ecological conservation, for the reforestation, and then the combat of desertification.
There are a lot of missions, all mixed, it seems, Mr. Zhang. Even in the 19th Party Congress report, you could see a lot of priorities being set up, which all needs a strenuous effort. So the question is, will China be able to achieve all of this at the same time? Not to forget that people would argue this is a certain development stage, and China has to go through certain development stage in order to reach a better future of environmental situation. Mr. Zhang, what do you think?
Well, I think the order certainly comes from the top. I think our president recognized the ultimate importance of the environment that Chinese people truly deserve, and also I think the leadership also recognized that environment not necessarily could be a burden or a constraint to the development, but rather if you use it wisely, that environment can lead. You can use the environment to optimize what's called the development mode of China, to green the economy, and then to inject more impetus into the Chinese economic development to make it more sustainable.
But you think about Saihanba, for example, because it has already won a huge award. Let's talk about it. It is used as a place to absorb carbon dioxide. And of course, it's been reforested in order to make that happen. And yet, China is a country, lack of land when it comes to per capita. So where are the lands for agricultural use, industrial use, and of course for environmental, even for breathe, for the cities and the rural areas? This is very hard debate. So, Mr. Zhang, is Saihanba an exceptional example, or it could be used as an interesting model for the other places to follow?
Well, I think my way of reading the Saihanba is really at a turning point. I actually call that a turning point. If you look at it, Saihanba, the mission started back to 55 years ago, right? And I didn't watch that closely, but I was saying that is the time that we're probably at the lowest point of our ecological deterioration. And then it's coming back. But Saihanba, I think, is leading the nation, started that mission earlier. And then achieve what we are achieving here today. But I think today the Saihanba is also leading, because today the whole country is going into this greenization process. But I think Saihanba demonstrates a higher level of persistency and consistency in the green effort, and to lead us to show that it actually can work.
Well, beautifully said. It actually can work, but will it work in the short term? Because as I mentioned earlier, there are very urgent environmental tasks that China needs to deal with. Smog is one of those examples, and that has to be done because even social stability needs efforts in order to address that issue. So, Mr. Chen, is Saihanba in that regard a very exceptional example because it is stretching a very long time? It is something that you plant the seeds only blossom decades later. Can China still afford that kind of slow process? Or there has to be some kinds of, even greatly forward effort in order to deal with some of the most urgent tasks we have today. And we all know, whenever you make greatly forward efforts, there are always side effects at the end of the day. Mr. Chen.
I think for the improvement of the ecological conditions of China need long-term persistence. We cannot achieve the improvements in a short time. So this is really not exceptional, but in terms of long-term effort, it is what it should be. Well, in terms of exceptional, I think it's because the government efforts, government support is really at that time in 1962 started such kind of reforestation efforts by setting up the mechanized forest farm by sending university students, almost 200 students working there. At that time, I still think the decision made at that time is really exceptional, especially considered China at that time just overcome the natural disasters and the food shortage crisis system.
A project is 65 or even 45 years ago. How much will be of reference to today, Mr. Zhang? For example, about the smog issue, people are asking that every winter, and they're asking it every month, and they're asking it every week, and probably every day. Mr. Zhang.
Well, I think you can look at the issue from several aspects. One is that I think the Saihanba itself has a material contribution to the reduction of the smog, because Saihanba certainly made a huge contribution to anti-desertification. Remember, Beijing was covered by a sandstorm, not very long ago, 10, 15 years ago when I was, I was born here, so I literally remember that. So that's one thing. The other one is you mentioned about all the carbon dioxide that Saihanba has absorbed. Certainly, I think in places like in Beijing, climate change has made a contribution in terms of the things like El Ninos, all the weather patterns inversions made a contribution to the smog issues here, not only on the pollution side, but also on the weather side. But I think the very reason Saihanba got this award, that really tells us that, environment protection has a temporal dimension. Everything takes time, but it is really need the external input and external intervention, like the government policy or the award like this, recognition from the UN, to help us to reduce that temporal dimension of the effort. So to tell people that it actually works, and you need to find all the ways and all the policy instruments try to shorten that effort so that it can make it effect today. Who
are the players leading the change? I think that is also an important issue here. Whether it is forever the government, because at urgency, government will jump out and say, let's just do it, and lead all the forces of the society to be able to concentrate the efforts and make it happen. However, in the mid and the longer term, it cannot be just government alone. So who are the players in the plan? Are there spaces for players to take their positions and also make their contributions? What about institutional building? What kind of institutional building we are talking about here? We can use this issue of smog. We can also use this very specific example of Saihanba to help us to understand this. Mr. Zhang.
Well, I think if you look at, again, the environmental landscape, and there's so many players in this, right?
Yes.
There's certainly the role of the government, and I think, I think the 19th Party Congress probably give us the clearest message with regard to the role the government is going to play. I think the industry is really coming up. If you examine carefully of the behavior, not only the state-owned enterprises, but all the private-owned enterprises, everybody's coming up. Everybody's trying to come up, with very innovative ideas. People talk a lot like the mobike, right? Bike sharing, car sharing.
Even though it has become quite a big problem these days because of some of the follow-up measures have not been necessarily implemented.
Right, but we can't deny it makes a contribution to the environment.
New ideas.
I think the public is also calling. If you look back on May the 26th, the party organized a meeting called for what they call the two greens. The green, not the green industrialization, but also green consumption. So it calls for the change of the behavior of the individuals, because I think recognized individual does play a role here. But I wouldn't say that. I think everybody is trying to go to the same direction, but it needs coordination. And this plan you're referring to is exactly, I think, is trying to play that role, to coordinate everybody's effort, to make them synchronize, to go into the same direction. And I think, again, I keep coming back to the Saihanba case, is if you look at Saihanba, I'm sure all the players are playing a role there, really to make this happen. Otherwise, it won't be able to happen. It won't stand there for 55 years.
The thing that I mentioned specifically, that is, China has to have a plan that can be implementable, but at the same time serve two purposes, if the two purposes are different. One is to be able to deal with some of the most urgent issues China is facing when it comes to environmental issues, and the other is fulfill its international commitment on the climate change issues.
Well, I think there is something there. This is called SDG. This is the Global Sustainable Development Target by 2030. I think China has already signed up to that, and that certainly aligns both domestic and international commitments China has made. But I want to say that I think the situation has also changed. That China used to be, more sort of follow the international lead and then just concentrate on the domestic issues. But I think, again, if you read the 19th Party Congress, it recognized the climate change as an unconventional security threat, and also a cause for China to fully fulfill its commitment under the Paris Agreement. In the meantime, that deal with the domestic issues and build the beautiful China. So I think that, again, I think this document is really careful reading, and we're certainly looking forward to the plan that's coming up in the March NPC meeting. But I think the way that this thing, as I understand it, has been really closely aligned with each other. So it certainly first domestic purposes, because we need to protect our people, but also to fulfill the commitment China has to the globe.
Saihanba, a project with a vision, started decades ago, finally see its flowers blossom, and that fragrance has been encouraged and praised by the world by this specific award. But more importantly than that is, what about the overall plan? Not a specific project, but every project has to work in the right direction. For now, I want to thank the two of you, Chen Liangzhong and Jianyu, for being with us. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.